Good evening there, everybody. Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would give my little fight review of the very interesting fight between that of a Naoya Inoue, of course, also known as the Monster, and of course, versus that of the top contender known as MJ Akhmadaliev. Now, of course, this fight was talked about by many, I believe, for the past couple of years, especially since for those of you that do not know, once upon a time before Inoue had moved up to 122 pounds, MJ Akhmadaliev was actually a former semi-unified champion there. I believe that he had two belts. Then, of course, he ended up losing those belts, I believe, to Marlon Tapales, the Filipino fighter that, of course, Inoue would eventually fight because the original plan probably was to fight that of an MJ Akhmadaliev, but then, of course, plans ended up changing once he ended up losing to that of a Marlon Tapales. And that was a fight that, in my personal view, that MJ Akhmadaliev did just end up deserving to lose, although that was a fight that could have went either way. But the question was about MJ Akhmadaliev was his case similar to that of a Vasily Lomachenko, someone that kind of had lost, to a more experienced fighter because he didn't have that much professional experience under his plate, or was he going to be someone that pretty much was around the same fighter? Well, MJ Akhmadaliev, in my personal view, he was going to be someone that, in my personal view, was going to be around the same level of fighter. And this fight pretty much went down exactly how I thought that it was going to go. Now, I believe, in my final prediction state that I thought that Inoue was going to win by stoppage because I thought eventually that MJ Akhmadaliev was kind of going to retreat a little bit and let Inoue hit up on him a little bit. What I will personally state is this: I was a little bit surprised that Inoue was a little bit more on the back pedal throughout the second half of this fight, but that goes to show you that I do believe that Inoue held MJ Akhmadaliev in a completely different respect than what he did most fighters that he's been in the ring with, at least as of recently. Now, I did state in the beginning of the fight that I thought that both fighters would be a little bit tentative and that in a way that he would start off with that stabbing jab to the body and a very decent body attack. That's pretty much exactly what he did. And then on top of that, I thought that as the fight would go along, that MJ, that there might be times where he comes forward and that, in a way overall that he either runs him into certain shots. But I thought overall that MJ would kind of retreat a little bit more because that's kind of what he does. And I thought that the more uncomfortable that he would be, that maybe Inoue would start to pressure him a little bit more, especially because once Inoue starts to go for the kill, or once he really starts to, feel, his opponent get a little bit uncomfortable, he gets very bloodthirsty and he usually likes to go for the knockout. But Inoue kind of surprised me a little bit because he actually was very, very responsible throughout the second half of this fight. You could tell that he knew that MJ Akhmadaliev was an opponent that could possibly run him into a shot if he was not careful. So that was probably the only slight surprise for me in this fight. I expected Inoue to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of putting on the pressure, in the second half of the fight. And he was, aggressive, just, a little bit more on the back foot. He wasn't necessarily aggressive on the front foot or trying to push him up against the ropes. But this fight pretty much went how I thought that it was going to go. MJ Akhmadaliev, of course, you had a lot of people, especially that wanted to tear down Inoue, that were claiming all this stuff about how Inoue was avoiding that of an Akhmadaliev and all this other stuff. And don't get it twisted. I do think that Inoue took a look at MJ and said, you know what, this guy is particularly dangerous. He's someone that if I do not play my cards right, I could potentially lose this fight. So I better be very prepared for this guy. MJ Akhmadaliev is someone that you don't necessarily want to fight unless you absolutely have to. But I am glad that Inoue took this fight. And I think that Inoue is also glad that he took this fight because this is going to be another big fight in Inoue's career. But it is not really a major shock to me. And I already stated this that, there was a possibility that this fight was going to go to the scorecards because Inoue, I did believe, held MJ Akhmadaliev in higher regard than what he did with other fighters. And I think that you could tell that if you took a look at the way that Inoue not only, overall was a bit tentative to take this fight. I don't think that he was ducking MJ Akhmadaliev necessarily, but the way that he was mentioning other fighters but not MJ, you could tell that Inoue was like, you know what, I'll face this guy, but it's not someone overall that's going to be first on my list because he's not someone that has a whole lot of recognition, and then on top of that, he is relatively dangerous. But I don't think Inoue was ever afraid of him necessarily. I just don't think that Inoue saw a mass appeal, and then on top of that, knew that MJ was someone that was talented and dangerous. But that being stated, MJ Akhmadaliev, to be quite honest with you, just in my view, I don't think that I gave him a personal round within this fight. I believe that the scorecards one was 9 rounds to 3, which, to be honest with you, I thought that even that was a bit too close. And I believe that the other two judges had it 10 rounds to 2. I suppose I can maybe see that. There was a couple of rounds where MJ Akhmadaliev ended up landing a very good shot, but to be quite honest with you, I scored it in a way 12 rounds to 0. I did not think that this fight was close whatsoever. And I remember, seeing Teddy Atlas overall talking about this fight and claiming overall that, well, MJ Akhmadaliev is so dangerous because he doesn't throw. And when you have fighters that don't throw and are very accurate, those fighters are very dangerous because you don't always know what they're going to do. And although that can be very accurate, like what we've seen with the Crawford and the Canelo Alvarez, although Crawford actually threw a decent amount more shots in that fight, but the point overall is that sometimes that can also end up losing you a fight. And for anyone overall that knows what they're watching when it comes to that of an MJ Akhmadaliev and also that of some of these Uzbekistani fighters, they're very talented, but they don't really have a style that, in my personal view, is really going to beat that of the great professionals within that of the sport of boxing. They throw a whole bunch of feints, and they'll run you into certain counters, and certain things like that. But they're not guys overall, in my view, that take enough charge or bite the bullet enough, in my personal view, in order to actually win the biggest fights of their career. And Inoue is someone that, as I mentioned, creates his own opportunities for offense. And when you have someone that creates their own opportunities for offense, and isn't just someone that completely works off of accuracy, but also is severely accurate, that's a very dangerous fighter. And those are the fighters that are the all-around greatest. They're the fighters that can be severely accurate, but they're also the fighters that can create their own offense. And that's a part of the reason why Terrence Bud Crawford also ended up beating that of a Canelo Alvarez tonight. Although, of course, I did end up, predicting Canelo to win because I thought that combined with the skill and the size, he'd be a bit too much. But I wasn't really surprised that Crawford ended up pulling off the upset. Because as I stated overall, that was a fight that could have went either way. It would all depends, on how often Canelo was going to be able to get within range. And of course, Canelo just was not able to get within range often enough. Akhmadaliev also was not able to get within range. But he kind of has a style to where he kind of prefers you to run into certain shots. He's a little bit more, at least from what I've seen, a little bit more on the back foot than, say, what an Israel Madrimov is. Now, Madrimov will still fight a little bit on the back foot, but he wants to mainly run you into shots. Interestingly enough, in a way, he kind of let Akhmadaliev take the lead within this fight. But now that I kind of look at it, I mean, it's not really that surprising because I think Inoue took a look at MJ and said, you know what, he prefers to be a little bit more within the mid-range and on the back foot and to let opponents run into his shots. So you know what, I'm going to make him pressure me a little bit more. And yes, he's, not too bad on the pressure side of things, but he's definitely not someone that prefers to mainly fight within that style. And Inoue is someone that is excellent on the back foot and also within the mid-range. He can run you into traps. He can run you into that left hook. He can run you into the right. We've seen some excellent right uppercuts landed by Inoue. He put on a masterful performance, and this is, in my view, probably about the third A-grade level win in his career. Once again, he has Fulton, he has Tapalas in my personal view, which is a very underrated win in my personal view, and he also has that of MJ Akhmadaliev. Inoue is definitely overall one of those special fighters, undoubtedly. But that being stated, the question also remains is when will Inoue overall possibly be debated as the number one pound-for-pound fighter, at least definitively. Now, certain people may say, what are you talking about? Inoue overall is in the debate as the number one pound-for-pound fighter, right? But after Crawford recently just defeated Canelo Alvarez, and also with Usyk being in the conversation as well for beating someone like a Fury and an AJ and a Danny Dubois, and also doing the things that he did at cruiserweight, those guys have kind of made their bones against the names that they needed to. Now, Inoue, of course, has a couple of very good names on his resume, and Fulton was someone that I think, of course, was a fantastic name at the time. But he is going to have more possible pound-for-pound lists, or pound-for-pound potential in order to be the definitive number one pound-for-pound fighter, which, of course, hopefully, for Inoue will lead to that of a Junto Nakatani next. Because these fighters, other than that of a Fulton, I think that MJ Akhmadaliev and Marlon Tapales, that they're very decent all-around fighters, that they're very good, but I wouldn't place them anywhere near above an A-, just in my personal view. I think that they're about A- level fighters. When I talk about a Stephon Fulton, I think that he's probably a little bit better than them. I would say that he's around an A-grade level fighter, but in terms of MJ Akhmadaliev and Marlon Tapales, I don't personally believe that those fighters are anywhere above an A- level. I could be wrong about that, but that's just my personal view of it. But the next fight overall that Inoue hopefully will entertain will either be the Nick Ball fight at his 5th weight class or the fight against Junto Nakatani. And of course, the fight that I also would love to see would be that, of a Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez fight, but I just don't think that that fight is necessarily going to happen. But, I'm not really surprised once again that in a way overall that, he ended up, going to the scorecards because I had a feeling, that he realized that MJ Akhmadaliev was someone that he had to take very seriously. And that MJ is a little bit tricky, especially with his feet and his movements and his angles. He's not someone that takes as much charge as what he needs to, but he is someone that's very accurate and has a lot of power. And I believe even in one of the final rounds, MJ Akhmadaliev, there was a couple of times where he hit Inoue, and it was very obvious that Inoue could feel that level of power. And let me also give Inoue a lot of credit because you can tell that even with the size of an MJ Akhmadaliev, MJ is at the very least, it looks like he's a solid 10 pounds bigger than that of an Inoue at the very least. Inoue is not a natural 122 pounder. So if he actually ends up unifying at the 126 pound weight class, that will be something that is extraordinarily level special, especially if he can beat fighters like a Nick Ball and a Bruce Shushu Carrington and certain guys like that. That would be an excellent, excellent victory on his scorecard. Or excuse me, not on his scorecard, but on his resume. Anyways, I apologize. I'm a little bit tired because not only was I awake for the Canelo Crawford fight, but on top of that, I was waiting for hours for this fight. And of course, unfortunately, there was a fighter that suffered, I believe, some sort of trauma after a headbutt. So this fight probably took an extra hour than what was expected. But anyways, that being stated, congratulations to Mr. Naoya Inoue. This fight pretty much went down how I thought that it was going to go, with him taking a body attack very early on, with mainly him creating his own offense, him countering MJ Akhmadaliev, and him basically getting that jab off more. And, a lot of people, of course, were disappointed in MJ Akhmadaliev's performance. I wasn't really disappointed in his performance because I didn't really expect anything else out of him. I never seen him as someone that was, in my view, ever going to definitively beat Inoue. I always thought that Inoue was a decently better fighter than him, and pretty much overall that was proven correct. But that being stated, I think that pretty much anyone that watches boxing overall and knows what they're talking about knows that Inoue more than likely was the better fighter than that of an MJ Akhmadaliev. Once again, certain people are, kind of disappointed by his performance. I'm not really that disappointed once again because, I think that MJ and, Madrimov, that they're very similar with their type of styles. They throw a certain amount of feints. They kind of want you to run into certain shots or to run you into certain shots, but they just don't create enough opportunities for their offense. They're very talented and they have a great amateur pedigree, but they're never going to be a top 10 level pound for pound fighter. It just is what it is. Inoue is someone that not only is a top 10 pound for pound level fighter, he has the potential to be the number 1 pound for pound level fighter. I just don't think that right now he's over in Alexander Usyk, or especially over that of a Terence Bud Crawford after his most recent performance over a Canelo Alvarez. But the fight overall that, once again, in my view, that needs to happen next for an Inoue is going to have to be that Junto Nakatani fight. Because that Junto Nakatani fight, first of all, it would be huge for the Japanese, overall, of course, because that fight would happen in Japan, obviously. And they are probably two of the best Japanese fighters in the world right now. Probably two of the best Asian fighters in the world right now. And then on top of that, overall, Junto Nakatani is someone that is a legit 3-weight division champion. He is ranked as top 10 pound per pound on many lists, and he might be debatably the most skilled fighter that Inoue has ever fought. He's someone that knows how to move around. He knows how to use that jab. He knows how to use his length. He can fight somewhat within a multitude of ways. I have not watched Junto Nakatani as much as probably what I should have, but what I have seen of him, he does appear to be a real deal level fighter, and that is debatably someone that could be a big level threat to that of an Inoue. So we'll see what happens. And in this fight, Inoue did go to the scorecards. He was someone that overall at times did not take, as much a charge as maybe what he could have to possibly get the stoppage. But I'm not going to go after Inoue that much about that because this was looked at as a big fight. This was looked at as one of the bigger fights in his career over a very talented fighter, someone that also was very powerful, very skilled, had a great amateur pedigree, and someone also that was very powerful that could have possibly, knocked out Inoue if Inoue would have not been careful and ran into a dumb shot. So, I thought that Inoue put on the proper performance that he needed to. So very good for him. But anyways, that being stated overall, congratulations to Mr. Inoue. But once again, we will see overall how he performs against the likes of that of a Junto Nakatani. I would favor him over the likes of a Junto Nakatani and probably any fighter that is similar of size. But that being stated, that Junto Nakatani fight is going to truly reveal how great Inoue actually is. I do believe that he has the goods, and I do believe that he is an all-time great level talent and fighter. But, once again, Junto Nakatani, that is going to be a first step in my personal view of him turning, overall into the for sure all-time greatness level. I think that, of course, certain people may say that, what are you talking about? He's already on the all-time great level scale. He definitely is, in my view. But beating guys like Junto Nakatani and Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez is going to be a completely different level. And, overall, Naoya Inoue, if he ends up beating guys like Junto Nakatani, and guys like a Bruce Carrington and a Nick Ball and certain guys like that, is going to be looked at on a whole nother level than even just guys like a Marlon DePalis or that, of a MJ Akhmadaliev, although those are A- level wins in my view. But Nakatani, Fulton, Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, even Nick Ball, those are legit A-grade level wins. They're going to impact his career quite a bit, not to mention other possible wins like that of a Bruce Shushu Carrington or some others. But we'll see what happens. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.